Welcome everybody in the Roadkill Roundtable. This is BT's on the Fly, coming to you from Boise, Idaho. Tonight we're going to tie Wonder Wings and we're going to make them really easy for you. Hello everybody, I'm Al Beatty from Boise. Like I said, this is my lovely wife Gretchen. Tonight I'll be your presenter and she'll be the IT person and the person that also keeps me in line, which is her biggest task of all. We'll start tonight though by taking a look at a stack of materials. Why don't you go to the D camera, Gretch? All right, we don't have much here, as you can see. It's well, I'll just start. I've already got some sized hackle. It's all sized for the hook that I'll be using tonight, and I'll be using size 10 dry fly hooks. And I'll just set that hackle over there at the vise, and the hook's just size 10 dry fly standard. We'll be using some Touchatron dubbing, which is about the same thing as if you happen to have muskrat belly fur, you're in business. We'll be using gray thread. I'll set that over at the vise as well. We'll be using some whiting tailing feathers, and I have one already over there, so we'll deal with it when we get over there. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's the tailing feathers are from the spade feathers in the shoulder of the bird, and they're from Coq de Leon. The birds are from Spain. Tom managed to get access to some of them, and anyway, those fibers are long and spiky, and the Spaniards use these fibers all bundled up to tie caddis, almost like an elk hair caddis, but it's a hackle fiber wing caddis, except they have some kind of Spanish name for it. Never could figure it out. And anyway, we're going to be tying our wings though out of these big old webby feathers. I'm going to show you how to actually manufacture your wings. So no matter how big this feather is, doesn't make any difference. You can make it in any size you want. Now we're going to start on the hook about 1/3 back from the hook eye. I just placed 2 turns of thread, and I'm going to cross over and wrap part of the way to the end of the shank. And for those of you that might be wondering, the end of the shank is this spot right here, where the straight part of the shank starts to bend down into the curve. I'll just put my pointer away. Now I want you to notice that I did not wrap a thread base all the way to the end. That's because I'm going to have a hackle fiber tail. And by the way, this is one of those tailing feathers from a Coq de Leon bird. Nice, long, straight, and spiky as can be. Can you imagine what a caddis looks like made out of those? Number one, can you imagine how many fibers it's going to take to make any kind of a wing on a caddis? It's going to take a heck of a lot of fibers. But anyway, I am going to pull the fibers out, get them all lined up. And I got some fibers here that are not going to get with it. I got some fibers down here that are not going to get with the program. They're too short. So I'll just got those all even. Now, one of the tricks about taking fibers off of the stem is if I pull with my left hand, pull those fibers away, I'll invariably misalign them. But if I hold them firmly in the left hand and tear the feather away with my right, like that, they don't misalign. Now we're going to measure these for length, and I like my hackle fiber tails to be the length of the complete hook. You can look back at some of the old pattern books, and they had tails on them as long as the 1 1/2 times the length of the shank, everything under the sun. I don't know which is correct, but I kind of like the length that we have here. Gives pretty good support. Now I want you to notice that I did not put a thread base under my hackle fiber tail. And the reason being is I want you to notice there's not a lot of dimension there, but the thread, if I had put a thread base on the hook shank, there would be a little bit of dimension there, so that when I got to the end of the hook, these fibers are slippery, and what ends up happening is just as you get to where you think everything is right, the thread will slip and tilt your tail downhill. Sometimes it won't slip until after it's been in the box and went down a bumpy gravel road. And then you'll open your box up and you say, "Dadgum, all those tails are tilted down. They weren't that way when I tied them and put them in the box." Well, the only time we don't put a thread base under a material is when we use squirrel for a tail, or when we use hackle fibers. And it's because the material is so dense that the last turn of thread can slip. Now, I know that sounds like a kind of a crazy thing, but let me throw a half hitch in here real quick, because we need to talk for a moment, and I'm going to take the hook out of the vise here in just a minute. But we're going to start with this great big old cape. And I'm just going to reach down here and get one of the big feathers out of the end, of different sizes. It doesn't really make any difference. In fact, I'm going to tie one with two feathers that are different sizes. I just pulled 3 feathers out there, and they're all pretty close to the same size. But we're going to look at one thing here. I want you to notice that the butt end of the stem is pretty thick. And as we travel towards the tip of the feather, the stem gets gradually thinner, and all of a sudden, let me get my pointer out again. All of a sudden right there, it gets real thin and stays thin all the way to the tip. The part of the feather that we want to use for the wonder wing is the part that has very little or very slender stem in around the fibers. Not that it makes any difference, but what is really helpful about that is that there's no extra weight from a stem in there. Now, one of the things, I'm just going to take and do a little demonstration with this single feather. We have some measurements that we need to deal with in making our wonder wing. I want you to notice that I swept those fibers back on a length of stem that's less than the length of the hook shank. I personally like it to never be more than 2/3 the length. In fact, I really prefer about a half. So let me pull some of these back. There we go. Now, that's the length of stem right there. That's roughly a half the length of the hook shank. And what's going to happen is we're going to use that to form a wing that will be swept back fibers and a looped wing at the same time. Now, you notice also that I'm only using 1 feather for my illustration here. That's because I wanted to talk about proportions and how many fibers go into a properly proportioned wing. But when we actually tie one, which is going to be now, I have a couple of feathers already prepared, just like the ones we pulled out. You can see they're big guys, but I have 2 of them paired up so that their natural curve is away from each other. And I hold them in a clothespin to keep those ends even that I trimmed. Now we're going to go back to that same formula we talked about before. A piece of stem, half the length of the hook shank. And let's see, is that about half the length? Yep, pretty close. Now, here's where we can run into a problem with the wonder wing. The darn thing, we need to have it be that long. Why? Well, the original wonder wing was actually, let me just lay these down for a second. The original wonder wing, we'll go back to this single feather. When we saw it for the first time in Europe in about 94, I think it was, they tied it to the hook just like that, stem fibers and all. It makes an absolutely gorgeous wing. But that stem has got enough stiffness in it that will cause your leader to twist like crazy as the fly flip-flops going through the air. So what we needed to do was to get rid of that stem. And we tried everything under the sun, and we ended up with the process you're going to see right here. And in fact, you'll find that in chapter 3 of the book on our website called Wonder Wings. And there's a bunch of different ways to tie wonder wings in different patterns. And here's what you're going to learn in about chapter 3. And this is very, very important. You can't tie those fibers on to the length that they need to be. Because what happens is As the thread tightens, those fibers twist over each other, and your wing will be cocked in every direction but the one you want. What you do then instead is you tie this on very short. Use the strength of the stem temporarily to anchor the feather in place. It'll turn on its side. Don't worry about it. We'll straighten it out later. And then you start pulling the wing out to the length you want it to be. And what happens is it takes those fibers and lines them all up with each other. And let me just grab another hook that's got another hook here and check it for length. I want the hook to be, or the wing to be equal to the length of the hook shank. And that's about it right there. And I'll just go ahead and tighten it down. Trim off the waist. I want you to notice that I made that trim. Most of it I trimmed off from the off side flat along the shank. And that's because it gives it a very steep cut to the waist ends and allows them to blend into the tail very nicely. Now let's just go ahead and stand up those wings. And we're going to pull them apart, get ready to trim off the excess. Notice I said excess, not waste. That's because that's not waste. That's future flies. Now I'm going to crisscross between those wings to kind of set them the way I want them to set. And let's just take a look at them. All right, there we go. And we want you to see what those wings look like. They're nicely positioned. So, and they're lots of flexibility. So they give you a really good profile, but when you're casting them on a light leader, they don't twist. Let's talk about wax for a moment. I'm going to open up the wax, and I want you to notice that this wax is barely peeking above the edge of my tube. That's very important. If you don't, if you have it cranked up too tall, too high, you'll end up with lumps of wax on your thread. But let me get up here now, and we're going to put our wax on the thread. And I want you to notice, you can probably see that every now and then we get a little bit of a bump of wax. There's one right there. I'll get rid of him. But what we're doing is just making the thread really sticky. Now we're just going to touch our ball of dubbing to the sticky thread. In fact, I'll pick up the process just a little bit. And you can see that that sticky thread is not grabbing an awful lot of dubbing. Too many people in the process of dubbing really overdo it. Now I'm going to twist in one direction only. All right, we're just gonna, now the reason if I had put more wax on my thread, well, I would have ended up with more dubbing on the thread. But my goal here is to tie a fly that looks like a mayfly. And there aren't any fat mayflies out there except for maybe the green drake. And that's not even fat, but it's fat compared to the others. Now, I'm going to get a couple of feathers out here. These are pre-sized hackle feathers. I'm just going to get a couple of shorter ones out. Successfully wrap 2 hackles, but not at the same time. If you do it at the same time, you'll tie flies a lot faster, but you won't have the same quality. But I want you to notice that I've got these feathers together and I've stripped the stems. And I'm just going to crisscross over those stems, just like that. They're pointing in the direction that they're going to go. Let me just work my way forward in front of the wings. Now I'm going to come back and grab those fibers or stems and bring them forward, and I'm going to cut them off so they don't stick out in front of the hook eye. Now I'm going to come back here and bind the part behind it. So I'm not only have I got my hackle feathers pointing in the direction that I want them to go, but I have also anchored them, so they're probably not going to pull out. Now, I've got two feathers here, and yeah, one's a little longer than the other. I'll just take the longest one because it happens to be on the inside. And which is the inside? The inside is the one that I pulled the outside one out of the way. This is the one that's going to wrap forward and be inside of the back one. See, we still got another turn or two we can do behind it. Well, let me just go ahead and wrap this, and I'm going to show you how to make a nice, neat head. There's two tricks to a nice, neat head, especially when wrapping a couple of hackles. I'm working my way forward. Okay, now I've reached the point, and I'm not quite all the way to the hook eye. Let me tie off my feather. Two turns and a third, and that's it. And I'm going to stop right there. Now I still have some space, you can see right there, between that hackle that I just wrapped and the actual eye of the hook. But what I want to do now is pull these fibers back and wrap a bit of a jam knot that pushes back against that hackle. See how it pushes it back? Now I'm just going to trim that off, and you don't even worry about trimming it real close, because all that's left when it's not trimmed close is fiber sticking up. And guess what? Well, it's sticking up in the fibers. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is to wrap the outside hackle. This is how we do percentages of one color or another color, is by which hackle is the outside and which hackle is the inside. And we're working our way forward. And now we're up to the point where we tied off that first hackle. We're going to wrap now in front of that little stub that we left, and with another couple turns. And now we're going to anchor that off with a couple of turns only. And I'm going to stop right there, because we're going to show you a trick that will fix any garbage in heads on your flies forever, as long as it's this type of a tie-off. There's other flies that, let's say a bead head or a bullet head, well, you're not tying off at the hook eye, you're tying off somewhere else on the hook. But now here's the process that so many people go through. There's two turns of thread holding that feather. They think to themselves, darnell, that's a pretty good looking fly. I don't want it to come apart on my first cast. I better put some more wraps of thread on that. Number 3, number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 16, 18, 20. Well, those 20 turns will hold it. Oh, I better cut off the feather now. So you cut off the feather. Oh, I got to cover up the cut off feather. And you end up with a really good looking fly and a big lopsided head. Happens all the time. Let me back up to that's the 2 turns we started out with. Now here's the trick. The trick is, remember when we pulled those fibers back and we wrapped a jam knot? Well, right now we've got the feather anchored. Let me get my pointer again. We've got the feather anchored from this direction right here. What we're going to do next is pull all these fibers back and the feather itself back and wrap a thread head and a jam knot. So the only thing in our head, under our head, is thread and bent feathers that are bent back out of the way. Now I want you to notice, let's see if I can get that. We've got a nice delicate head, and there's not a single fiber jammed in that head. Now I'm going to stop, and normally we would leave that hanging there at the back of the head. I'll exaggerate it by putting a few extra turns on it. It's positioned in the perfect spot to make this second pass coming forward. Now, do I recommend you do that? No, but I remember when I wrapped it back and did the jam knot that pushed this feather. Let me get here. That pushed this feather back. Well, guess what that does? By using the jam knot to make a nice clean head, it sets you up for a good whip. So I am going to now trim off my my thread, and I actually don't trim it. I just push the scissors. And the same thing with the feather, just push the scissors. It cleans it all up. And I want you to notice that we've got a nice clean head there. In fact, the whole fly looks pretty good. To the 1/3 point and stop right there. Now let me zoom. No. Now, any more questions before we go into the next fly, which is the parachute version of the same pattern? We have a bit of a problem. We wanted those nice flexible fibers to be very flexible so that our fly would not cause the leader to flip-flop and all that type of stuff. And now, how in the heck are we going to strengthen them to support a parachute hackle? All right, and we'll just bind those in place. And now I'll trim off the waist. You notice that I'm laying in from the off side of the hook, flat along the shank. And that steep cut that we made blends everything together pretty nice. But here's the problem. See when I put a little bit of a tension on the feather, well, it pulls out because it just can't support that. Well, let's get out here. I want you to notice that I'm holding the thread up above the hook, and I just grab the feather. Now it's under tension, and the thread's under tension. I'll get back to this point right here. Relax the tension on the thread. Relax the tension on the feather. Bring it forward, grab the feather, put tension on the thread. At first, you have to kind of tell yourself this, and after a while, you get to where you just do it. And I want to pull some slack. I don't dare pull the slack. I have to twist the bobbin just a little bit. Now here we're going to get to the point where oh boy, this is getting tough. Okay, we're going to borrow vernacular from our brothers and sisters in the construction trades. I just wrapped around and around those hackle fibers. I just poured concrete. Now I'm going to put in a strand of rebar straight from the top of that post and anchor it. So we have one pour of concrete and one piece of rebar. Now I'm going to go around this, pour my concrete in the other direction. We're in Australia right now, so it's going the other way. And we're going to put another piece of rebar in there. Now I want you to notice this. It's already starting to get pretty darn strong. The wrapping around and around and then putting strands of rebar into it really strengthen it. Well, anyway, I'm going to do that again. Okay, now we're going to end up adding 5 more pieces of rebar before we put the final pour of concrete. And we're going to do that right now. And I'm going to show you how we do that. Let's divide our wings. And we're going to put a crisscross between those rings. Now, I am going to do a zoom in here. Okay, now we're going to zoom in, and those of you that are prone to motion sickness, just close your eyes. Okay, you can look now, and I want you to notice that we've got a couple of pieces of rebar on the near side. You can't see them because they're on the off side, but that crisscross between the wings gives us 4 pieces of rebar, 2 front, 2 back. We'll leave those hanging in the breeze for now. As I dub forward, now we're going to talk about a problem that people often have with their parachutes. How many times you've been on the river getting ready to tie on a parachute and you just can't quite get the doggone tippet, down through the eye because you've got just that little bit of feather that you trimmed off right there at the hook eye, clogging the darn thing. And so you're digging through your fly box, getting another fly to poke a hole through so you can get your tippet through. Now, if that sounds familiar, I've got the solution for you. First off, though, we're going to go back to tying on the feather while dubbing forward at the same time. The thread's still there, so you can dub while you're going forward. And most people would stop at this point right there. We're not going to. Instead, we're going to wrap back to the post. Crisscross a couple times until we've got our body built up pretty good. Now I'm going to flip up here and wrap. I'm going to do one more application of concrete. And the last strand of rebar is the feather stem itself. We'll just anchor that in place. Now the wings are going to twist, and don't worry about that. We'll take care of those in a minute. We'll wrap each turn closer to the body until we reach the body. I want you to notice that I left the thread hanging behind the post. And that's really important because we're just going to wrap around that post 2 times. Could do it just once, but we're going to do it 2. And that anchors the feather in place. Let's trim off the waist. Whoops. Tilt that up so I can see what's going on here. You guys in the camera, maybe that looks like that's all right. Okay, now I'm going to take one more turn and tuck under that little piece of feather, and I'm going to turn my vise up like this. Let me see. There we go, right there. You can see what's going on. Now I'm going to do a whip finish a different way. We're going to take a half hitch tool and do a half hitch. Well, you can do a whip finish with a half hitch tool as well. Now I'm just reaching off camera and rubbing the knitting needle, if you will, against my nose where it picked up just a little bit of lubrication so I could do a 3-turn whip finish. And another 3-turn whip finish. And that finishes the fly. And we're going to dip our bodkin in the glue, and we're going to drop it right there so that it goes back into the body area. Now the next drop of glue is right there. Notice how I tipped it up, and it's going to run forward. And if I count to 3, it will travel forward on that piece of thread and glue the eye. If I go to 4, 5, and 6, it'll glue the eye shut. So ask me how long it took to figure that out. Well, anyway, you drop the glue in here, tilt it up so it can run forward. 1, 2, 3, and stop. And it won't glue the eye shut. But otherwise, you'll glue the eye shut if you wait too long.